I'm here with Chloe Franses, the other co-chair of the PRCA Purpose Group, who's waving now. And we've got a fantastic panel for you today. We're going to be talking about youth and purpose, which is very exciting. As I'm sure some of you know, we launched the Purpose Group earlier on this year. And we did our first session online right after lockdown, which was more of a, I suppose, an introduction to purpose, really. There's obviously so much being talked about around purpose. So we wanted to just set the scene in terms of what our ambitions were, our understanding of purpose and our ambitions for the Purpose Group, for the PRCA. Initially, we were hoping that was just going to be a one-off and that we were going to be able to do further events during the year in person, but obviously it hasn't quite worked out like that. So we decided to host this summer series of online events during July and August before people may or may not disappear on holidays, and really just to be focusing on some of the key issues around purpose that we think are relevant for PRCA members, and particularly relevant in the current environment, considering what's been happening with COVID and what the future will look like in that post-COVID world. Obviously around COVID, there's been a lot of questions around social and economic inequality, particular impact on demographics. We've seen the impact on women in terms of domestic abuse, increased workload. The Black Lives Matter movement obviously has been coming to the fore. There's been a lot of talk about mental health, about climate change. So there's a lot of issues that we'd love to touch on all of them. Unfortunately, we can't. But we thought it would be really interesting for this first session today to talk about youth and purpose. And in particular, so the title of the event is Make Way for the Purpose Generation, and how Millennials and Gen Z are shaping the post-COVID world. Just because we think that youth is a really interesting demographic, and I think that it's a really important group that maybe within the PRCA in the world of communications professionals, whether we're in-house or in agency, it's easy to kind of forget that this new demographic, which is coming up, is really owning the purpose agenda and is really pushing it forward. And millennials and Gen Z are going to be making up 2/3 of the population. So it's a really important demographic to take into consideration. And I think we can learn a lot from them in terms of how they really are shaping that future. So what we want to do today is discuss what's important for young people when it comes to brands specifically, how companies can really authentically engage with youth audience on some of these big social issues, and the importance of really empowering that next generation to build a better future for everyone. So I'm going to introduce our fabulous speakers in a moment. Just a couple of house rules firstly, and then I'm going to hand over to Chloe for a brief introduction as well. Unfortunately, fortunately, there's a lot of people on here, but we can't then make it sort of an interactive session. So if you've got any questions, if you could just enter them in the chat box, that would be fantastic. And then we'll get to them after the panel. The session should be about half an hour, and then we'll leave about 15 minutes for Q&As afterwards. I think we're going to be recording it, so it can be watched afterwards and shared, of course. We've been posting about it on social media, and we will maybe share some sound bites afterwards. So if you want to, get involved in that conversation online, you're most welcome to Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn. So I think that's from me to start with. I'll just hand over to Chloe now.
Thanks. So yes, Chloe Franses. I think one thing to add to Daniela's point of the summer series as a whole. It is a 3-part series, so this week, next week, and the week after on Monday afternoon, same time. And part of the reason for doing this is really to bring together and hear from a broad spectrum of thought leaders in their areas who can facilitate discussions, share views and insights with our audience, all with the idea that we will be collating insights from these events to produce an end-of-year purpose report for the PRCA, which we'll then share at the end of the year, if we get there at this rate. I think just now to go into who our 3 panelists are and kind of get into the discussions we're going to have today and moving forward.
Great, thanks, Chloe. So we've got, as I say, 3 fantastic speakers today. We've got Christina Adane. She's a youth activist, co-chair of Bite Back 2030 Youth Advisory Board, which tackles childhood obesity, aiming to cut childhood obesity by 2030. She's also a member of Tribe Named Athari, which is an organisation focused on the Black Lives Matter movement, which she's going to tell us more about. And she's also been campaigning, she's been involved in the campaign for school vouchers, along with Marcus Rashford and others. So she's got a great perspective, and she's going to be talking about that shortly. We also have Paul Irwin, the founder of TryLife. That's an interactive and educational drama series for young people. It's got a huge wealth of experience working with young people over the years, and is going to share some views from his perspective. And then we've got Uchea, who's the co-founder and head of partnerships of Word on the Curb, which is a strategic youth insight agency, and similarly very well connected in the world of youth, and some great insights that he's going to be able to share. So I don't know if we want to start off, maybe it would be great if we could have each of those panelists, starting maybe with Christina, then going on to Paul, and then Ndu, talking about themselves and their organisations. As I said, I've just sort of mentioned everyone's titles, but it'd be great to hear about the kind of work you've been doing and your focus on young people. Christina, if you'd like to start off.
Cool. So hi everyone, I'm Christina. I am co-chair of the Buy Back 2030 Youth Board, and it does aim to halve child obesity by 2030 and also promote healthy eating amongst young people, as well as ensuring young people have the right and the choice to eat healthily. So we've seen over like the past couple decades loads of advertisements and all that, and the globalization of food has led to like insanely cheap food accessible very easily, but it's extremely unhealthy. It's for young people, and yet that's what's being sort of marketed to us. So we definitely want to change that. Recently, I worked on the Free School Meals campaign. I started a petition to provide free school meal provisions over the holidays, and yeah, that got a lot of traction. I think it's on almost 300,000 signatures now.
Wow.
And yeah, so that's kind of what kickstarted the movement around that. And then of course Marcus Rashford led us to the finish line, so that was amazing. We're still fighting to make that across all holidays, because now it's only for the summer holidays, but you know, we can't just let kids go hungry again in February. So yeah, and with TNA, Tribe Named Athari, Athari means impact in Swahili, and our vision is to work, like, we do social transformation, radical education, and Black liberation. We are working with Black communities to build power and offer direct support. We're building a model of society that transforms through healing, care, and empathy. We aim to build a model where Black life is valued, and not just in the UK, but across the world. Currently, we are working on a couple of rallies, working within our communities to ensure that young Black kids are doing well, ensuring their healing, ensuring lockdown isn't too much of a strain on their mental health, teaching them how to cook, sort of home economics and things like that. So yeah, that's what I'm working on now.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Christine. That's you say very, very busy. Paul, do you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So my background initially was youth and community work based. I got involved in community work because I was in care at 14, 15-year-old, came out of care at 16, and it was just one worker that engaged with me, took the time, and I started volunteering, helping out at the local community centre. Eventually ended up working all over the northeast, and then moved down to southeast London, worked with young people there. I worked with young people lived out in Jamaica on a homeless project, worked in Bradford after the race riots. I slowly started becoming more involved in media, but still all focused around work with young people. So I was organising events for BBC Blast, giving young people the chance to try radio production or film production. And eventually I was working at Bernardo's when the financial crisis happened in 2008. Youth services were just absolutely destroyed. I think on average, youth services have been cut by 67%. And in the northeast, it's like 97%. But that was along with community projects, libraries, schools, youth centres, mental health services, sexual health services, careers advice, just everything was cut. So I thought there's got to be a way of trying to engage with young people. And I know from my kids, I've got to text them just to get a response out of them when they're in the same room. And I thought, well, let's try and engage with young people around like health and social issues, but using technology. So if you look at this generation of young people, it's the most definitely diverse generation that the country's ever known. They've been brought up with mobile phones, gaming and the internet. They probably spend more hours a week consuming media than they do get sleep. So we decided to take the old choose your own adventure books and create an interactive film series. So a normal feature film is 90 pages of script and runs from A to B, and ours are about 455 pages long. And the action pauses, and then you get to decide what happens. So do you go to the party, yes or no? Do you smoke a spliff, yes or no? Does the character have sex? Is it protected? Is it not? If the character had unprotected sex, we would film around 12 different outcomes. So the character had maybe they would go to the sexual health service and find out if they're pregnant or have chlamydia or any of the STIs. And it wasn't about saying what's right or wrong. It was just about allowing young people to experiment with life choices and see the consequences of their actions. What we didn't realize is that we'd wrote the world's most complex interactive film ever. We'd wrote like 2/3 of Lord of the Rings trilogy, and it just went absolutely crazy online. We've now produced 5 films covering knife crime and gang violence, mental health and suicide, drugs and alcohol, sexual health, grooming and child sex exploitation, isolation and loneliness, which has got our first gay character, first trans character, and we were about to film the 6th before lockdown on teenage pregnancy and mental health. But just by engaging with young people and taking those community development and youth work principles and just applying it online, we now in some weeks reach 188 million people. In 1 month, using one mobile phone, we reached 140 million Americans, which is 65% of all Facebook users in America, with no advertising and marketing spend. In that same month, we reached 25 million people in the UK, 9 in Australia, 6 in Canada. It's just unbelievable. What we wanted to do with young people was just have that conversation with them about some of the difficult life choices and stuff that people face. But that's TryLife.
That's great. Thanks so much, Paul. Ndu, do you want to introduce yourself and your organisation?
Yeah. Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. So my name's Ndu. I'm the co-founder of Word on the Curb, and as Daniela mentioned, we're a strategic youth insight agency that helps connect businesses with Millennial and Gen Z audiences, specifically from ethnic minority backgrounds. It's been, I guess, a 7-year journey, which started from university, where we just wanted to, I guess, tackle the stigma that we found a lot of young people had, often from the media, who seem to portray young people in quite negative lights. And being in university and having quite a large friendship group who would go on a night out, come back and watch Question Time, we knew that that wasn't necessarily the case. So we wanted to, I guess, showcase to the world that, there's a lot of diversity within youth, if you were. So my business partner and I, who didn't come from film backgrounds, went and bought a camera and started going around documenting the opinions of young people around campus. After graduating, we're both from London, so knew we weren't in a campus environment, and thought, how can we diversify the YouTube channel which we had built, which is to this day still called Word on the Curb. And so I guess fast forward 6-7 years, we create what we like to call edutainment content, which is educational and entertaining, predominantly targeted at Millennial and Gen Z audiences. Within a year of doing that, so back in 2014, we had amassed quite a large following on social media platforms because of the content we were making. And so Channel 4 got in touch with us and said, we're trying to speak to similar demographics as you are, but we're struggling to do so. How can you help us to do that? And I guess that's the birth of our agency model of helping different brands and businesses to reach the audiences that we're able to reach. And I guess to date, we've now worked with the likes of the NHS, Apple, Bernardo's, Nando's. So we're able to connect those organizations with specific demographics because we just choose to understand them. And the model we do with that is insight. So it's always insight first. We segment, who we feel that you're trying to speak to, because, as I always say, I'm a 28-year-old man. My cousin who's 16 or my cousin who's 18, we both fall in this millennial and Gen Z demographic, but they completely operate in different ways than I do. They're using different platforms. So we always realize that we need to understand the demographics that we're trying to speak to. So we actively do that, and insight underpins all of the work we do, both for our channels and the brands and businesses and other organizations that we work for as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ndu. And all great to hear from all of you. Such innovative, creative ways of engaging, but also really kind of building on insight, knowledge, and ways to communicate. I think what we've heard a lot about through this COVID time, and as we come through lockdown, whether it goes back in or not, we're hearing a lot about building back better. But as we've seen it through social media and in different contexts, it obviously means something very, very different to both different individuals, but also different audiences. It would be great to hear a little bit more from each of you about what you think building back better looks like, certainly for the communities and the people that you're speaking to, different generations, and also in such a way that you think really works and engages that dialogue to be something productive and turning intention into action. So if we come back to you, Christina, it'd be great to hear.
Yeah, I definitely think lockdown has been an amazing period for me because I've had the opportunity to sort of take in everything that's happening and in the world and sort of see where I stand, what I want to do about it, and things like that. And I feel like a lot of young people are realizing the duty that we kind of have to make the world a better place, even though that's really cliche, and are sort of realizing that we need to make our own noise. So when it comes to building back better, I see that as sort of young people having more of a voice and more of a decision, more of a voice in terms of like making decisions and things like that, not only with brands and companies, but just like why do we have to go talk to people and say this and that? Why isn't it just that if we say something, why isn't it heard? Do you know what I mean? Why do we have to be supported by like millions of people who have a massive platform? And yeah, I think in terms of fight back, obviously Brexit has been ignored for quite a while, but we're kind of scared that our health, the nation's health, is going to sort of turn into America in terms of like chlorinated chicken and all these bad things that might come in. So we want Boris, the government, to sort of step up and build on our food industries for the better. Now there's like a massive, even with what Marcus Rashford has achieved, he's brought the conversation to the forefront, and we can actually talk about health. And with the movement as well, we can talk about race openly, and there's a much larger understanding as to why people are so angry about this, and why it's a massive issue and why it's systemic and not just individual racism that we should be worrying about. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much, Christina. And Paul, I'm sure you've seen, sorry, just
a quick follow-up question for you, Christina, in terms of, do you think that then as well, sort of, you and your peers have looked at, what you can achieve with, Black Lives Matter and with the campaign with the school meals, and realize that, your voice can be heard, and, you have the opportunity to stand up and make a difference?
Yeah, we have, like with TNA, we formed, as a facilitating group. So there were loads of people calling for protests and organising protests, but there was no PPE, there was no food, water, just basic like first aid. So that's how we came about, because we were like, okay, we need to sort of scramble and get all these things and help all these people. And that was the initiative of young people. We did that. So I definitely think moving forward, we need funding and investment, and then we can sort of make our own solutions and have our own sort of grassroots kind of movement.
Great, thank you so much. And Paul, in terms of building back better, and certainly you're looking at projects that are working across the globe and talking to young people in very difficult situations and scenarios, and trying to help them figure that out. Is there a way that you can see work that you're doing and work you're doing with both your audience and with brands and communication, how you can build back better at this point?
Yeah, well, I think in an ideal world, building back better would be reinstating like youth services and mental health services and funding the schools again and all of the things. But it's quite obvious that through government policy and just by the track record that like those things are just not a priority for people. So, which is, you know, it just seems like it's just a crying shame, you know, that there's like just so many amazing workers out there that have had real impact on people's lives, that and that's gone. And something like TryLife will never be able to replace that face-to-face intervention that someone needs. From what we say with TryLife is just try to be the person that you needed when you were younger.
But do you think also with that highlighting of where there is a gap, because there's been a lot of discussion around whether brands should be coming in to fill those financial gaps?
I think that's where the gap is. And with TryLife, in the past, like people were with TryLife, people were like, why don't you put advertising banner space on the bottom of your videos? You could make a load of money. But we didn't want to do that. We just kept building more audience and building more audience. And when the audience started to get up like to the levels of Vice and the Washington Post and stuff like that, that's when people started taking notice. And we wanted to engage with brands, not just by sticking advertising banner space all over or someone holding a soft drink or anything like that. What we wanted to do was actually engage with brands that really did want to make a difference. And in terms of building back better, that's exactly what they can do. They stop using the strap lines, stop using the cultures, and stop using like all of the exploitative stuff. Not that I'm saying that everyone does that, but what they can actually do is create something that's going to make real difference. And I think people being on lockdown and social media is forced people to change, because people are passionate about it. Even with TryLife and some of the issues that we cover, like who doesn't want to know about life and death and drugs and sex and all of those things in between, and like, you know, relationships and everything. And we do it in a really hard-hitting way, you know, where some of our characters end up in a really dark place, but they can also end up in a really positive place as well. And I think the opportunity for brands to step in, if they want to do something, now is the time to do it, because there is no services there. So instead of just having like a fancy strap line or whatever, like actually physically get in and do something and actually engage with people. And it's not that difficult. Like, look at all of the projects that you've got speaking to today, that like every single one does that. And just to finish as well, you can no longer bombard people with information hoping that it'll get through. You don't have a captive audience of 2, 3, 4 channels. You know, like young people are masters at multitasking. They'll sit with 4 or 5 tabs open on 3 or 4 different, 5 or 6 different platforms. And
into my house then.
And like, why not like engage with them? Like, you know, like when you see people's posts on Instagram and stuff like that, like all of our crew, all of our cast is all sourced online. All of our music, our wardrobe, our makeup, everything is sourced online. And by putting a post out, not only are you engaging with someone, and actually having that physical interaction. But if you get the message right, people will readily share your work. And that's how we reach 188 million people in 1 week using one mobile phone. It's because people are involved and they can be part of it.
And authentic, I think. It's an overused word, but I think it comes back time and time again because it's what is needed. That real. Thank you so much, Paul. And Ndu, in terms of that vision of building back better, how do you see Word on the Curb and your work going forward and talking to your audiences, working with that?
Yeah.
Adding to that.
So, I mean, everyone's kind of said some really, really interesting stuff about that. From the lens of purpose, and I guess the lens of the workplace, we've done quite a lot of interesting insight, especially preparing for this talk. And it's just so interesting to hear what young people have to say. Of course, being in lockdown is definitely a negative for most people in general. But like Christina says, there are positives to come from it. I think one of the most obvious is a kind of willingness for everyone to start talking about things that have previously been uncomfortable for some people. Of course, you're pointing towards the Black Lives Matter movement, but it's even in other things like the funding of the NHS. Do we need to go on that business trip that is one day, or can we just use Zoom? These conversations are have been kind of in the offing for a while now, and I think lockdown has forced us, and COVID has forced us to have these conversations. Every generation, it's always that new generations are seen as wanting to do things radically different. But the difference within Millennials and Gen Z communities is that we have social media at our fingertips. So starting a business now is a lot easier than it ever has been. And we've run recent polls that show that almost half of our community that we survey on a frequent basis, both for ourselves and the clients we work with, have side hustles along with their 9 to 5. And I was one of them. I worked for 3 years at L'Oreal, and a lot of the time, this conversation around purpose was a thing for me. Do I stay in an environment which is very comfortable? I'm in a good job, I'm paid well, it's close to home, I can roll out of bed at 9 o'clock and go to work? Or do I kind of push the boat out and do something which is purposeful for myself? And that's the same for almost half of people under the age of 34. 70% of the community that we surveyed want brands and businesses to kind of touch back on what you were speaking about with Paul, want brands and businesses to speak about topics that are socially relevant. And if you get it wrong, 55% of them will stop spending money with you. So it's a conversations which post-COVID, I think people are way more open to the fact that brands, businesses, governments, everyone needs to start talking about the issues that people actually care about and addressing them without lip service, and actually doing stuff about it, putting money where their mouth is, making sure that diversity quotas are met, making sure that underrepresented communities, whether that's through gender or sexual orientation or race, are actually represented, not using diversity and inclusion as an afterthought. All of these kind of things have arisen, and arisen properly because of COVID and the conversations that have also happened around those times. So in terms of building back better, from a workplace standpoint, we're going to have to see a lot more transparency from small, medium, large enterprises, both in terms of conversations that may be uncomfortable to have, conversations which have been swept under the carpet for so long. And I think it's just so easy to be able to speak to these audiences. If you really want to find out from them, there are organizations that are in this room that exist to do that yourself. And at the top, Daniela mentioned the population size of Millennials and Gen Z, but even on top of that, Gen Z have a 90% influence on household spend. So if you're not interacting with that community themselves, then you're already at a heavy disadvantage.
Thank you. scary statistics, or encouraging statistics, in fact. It's I think it's also now looking at kind of, audience reach and the importance of transparency and talking and actually being called out. I think a lot of what we've seen is, across all three of you and what you've expressed, is an honesty around the need for transparency, because there needs to be change, and without brands coming involved and without that communication and looking to the experts who are, people who are communicating with one dimension between in these circles, we're not going to get to where we need to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think on that note, it's really interesting what you were saying, and do it as Chloe says in terms of statistics, and also as Chloe mentioned about that authenticity, that it's very difficult, I think, for companies and for brands to get it right. And obviously why we wanted to talk about you and your work and the youth audiences with this group at PRCA is because we are communications professionals, and we are working on behalf of companies and brands, whether that's within an organization, whether that's in an agency representing our clients. And I think it's really important that there is that authenticity to engage with. If you guys are these really important audiences, which you are, how do we engage with those audiences authentically? And I just wondered if you have any sort of tips, maybe starting off with Christina, in terms of what you want, what you expect from companies and brands. As Ndu says, young people are holding these companies to account, particularly after COVID, I think even more so than ever before. So what is it that you would like to see companies and brands doing more of?
Yeah, so definitely sort of being less performative, as Paul mentioned earlier. If you really do sort of want to make change, we're here. Like, give young people the initiative, let them make the solutions. Don't sort of, well, first of all, actually, stop covering up like the injustices going on sort of behind the scenes. Like, social media exists, like, we'll get down to the bottom of it, like young people always do. One of the biggest poisons of my generation is cancel culture, and that's because we can dig up literally anything because of social media. So I want companies to take accountability and then start there, and listen to young people. The unique thing about Bite Back, for example, is the fact that it's youth-led. Young people at its core, every decision that is made goes through us, and we are asked whether we are comfortable with it. We are asked about our opinions on it. And so everything you see, everything that is produced is co-signed by young people. And that's essentially what I want to see across all brands. Like, listen to us and what we have to say, because we are the leaders of tomorrow, but we are also the leaders of today. So
that's great. Thank you so much. Paul?
Yeah, I'll just echo what Christina said. Really, I think the opportunity there for brands is to really get in, to make change and get involved and actually interact with people. I think, if you give people real opportunities, people will people will get involved. I think with young people being brought up with video games and stuff, people are used to sitting forward and being proactive. And with social media, people are passionate about things. And social media, you see a lot of people dismissing young people as snowflakes, but it's not. It's just that they won't tolerate the racism or your transphobia or your sexism or anything anymore. So it's like you will be held to account, and that's got to be a good thing. And it might be uncomfortable for some people, but so what? That's how change is brought about. And I think if brands are bold enough and step forward, they'll realize that step wasn't actually a bold one. It was just the right one to make for society to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. That's great. Thank you. And Ndu?
Yeah, I'll be honest, it's not easy. We've had our own misgivings in the past with content that we make, and that's because in our small workforce, we're from very similar backgrounds, and so we've become aware of that, and we've adjusted it. But not only have we adjusted that, it's also an adjustment in the supply chain, and even just how we work. We work by asking our target audience questions and for their insight, which genuinely shapes the way we communicate with our following. And, you know, there's so many examples where organizations have just completely got it wrong, either because that diversity of thought, if you were, to quote a couple of crazy front benchers who've said that in the past, doesn't exist. And an example last year was the government's rollout of knife-free chicken boxes to, you know, hopefully curb knife crime. And when that came out, you know, we were just sitting in our office thinking, whose idea was this? Like, and was there no one who said this is a bad idea? Because everyone we spoke to knew it was terrible. And so we responded to that by just doing what we do, which is run insight. And we went to Stratford, took back some of the chicken boxes and asked people, young people in the area, you know, if you had this kind of like idea to help tackle the issue of knife crime, what would you do? And write those thoughts into the chicken boxes, and we're going to try and take it to the Home Office. And it whipped up a bit of a media frenzy, and we were in like loads of news publications for it. We actually went into the Home Office. They didn't let us bring the board in. It was too big for their airport security. And we're now kind of consulting them and their violence reduction units on it. But for us, it was so simple to just go out for a few hours and ask people some questions. And they spent £57,000 on the rollout of these knife-free chicken boxes. And when you couple that with, as Paul mentioned, the insane cuts in youth services, it just makes a mockery of the whole situation. You know, you have people who think that they deserve to be in positions of power who, quite frankly, don't, because they are so out of touch with the people who their policies are affecting. And all you really need to do is ask some people. We asked 100 people. It took us 3 hours. And, you know, that for us is the simple, if I was to say to anyone, you know, how to frame your communications, it would literally be just speak to your target audience. And if you don't have direct access, speak to people who do. Because yeah, it's not easy. I'm not going to lie, but you know, there's ways of making it easier for yourself.
That's great. That's really interesting. And I think, yeah, we've all seen campaigns where we're like, who was sitting in the room, who signed that off, you know, who agreed to that. But it is, yeah, I think it's even more damaging when it comes from the government. You know, they're not spending things on things that they should be spending it on.
I think the point about being cost effective as well in doing your research first, it's something that I think everyone can agree on is, you know, you've got a question, go to an expert. That expert doesn't all look, not all those experts look the same, otherwise they'd be experts in their field. And I think that idea of research before spend is really key.
Yeah, absolutely. If people would have any questions, if you'd like to put them into the chat box in under the Q&A, and we're happy to answer them. If you've got anyone in particular you'd like to ask a question to, then let us know. Whilst we're sort of waiting for questions to come through, we do have a few already, so maybe we could just ask. I mean, I think we've touched on a lot of social issues. Obviously, Christina's involved in you know, various things in terms of childhood obesity and Black Lives Matter, and but what, and obviously there's so many social issues. What are the social issues that you think are the highest priority for young people today? I don't know whether, Christina, you want to go first, maybe?
Yeah. So other than the ones I've mentioned, definitely sort of climate activism and mental health, I think, are the other two big ones. With climate activism, it's very difficult because there's sort of a middle class white bubble of activists when it comes to the climate movement, and it feels very inaccessible to a lot of people. And sort of bridging that gap and making companies sort of realize that there's more than just one face to the movement, I think is really important. And also sort of like, we all don't have access to the same information. And that's not because the information isn't there. It's just that, like, you know, caring about like climate and the climate emergency is sort of a privilege. It's kind of a luxury, because that means you don't have to think about the basic things, like, you know, when your next plate of food is coming from. So it is sticky in that sense, but I do think it is something that a lot of young people care about, although we might not be equipped with the sort of, like, a lot of people feel powerless essentially when it does come to that. And industry change is sort of the biggest way to do it, because I don't think we should guilt trip people into sort of buying bamboo toothbrushes and all that stuff. So yeah, and also with mental health, I think that's a massive one. If even with sort of like school choices, my best friend, when she was picking what school she wanted to go to for sixth form, she had like sort of deciding factor was, do they have good sort of mental health provisions? And that is something that is very attractive to young people today, because, well, there's no need to say why, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Paul, it'll be interesting to hear your views, because obviously mental health, and you've got sort of isolation and loneliness, you've got loads of topics that you cover in your films. Any thoughts from you?
Yeah, mental health definitely number one, I would say. Suicide is the biggest killer of young people. It's the biggest killer of young men. So mental health is definitely up there. And then a lot of the other things affect your mental health. So that's why I think mental health is number one. You know, people, racism, drugs and alcohol. I think just, you know, a lot of the young people that we work with are just so well, just fed up with like the bleakness of their existence. You know, like the quality of jobs, the 0-hour contracts, the lifestyle that they want or know that they should have, which is like just even sometimes just basic food and being able to afford a place and afford some food and like just be able to do stuff is just so far out of their reach. It's obvious why suicide is like the biggest killer of young people. It's because of no one can get on the housing market. The cost of rent is sky high, especially down in London. The kind of careers and jobs that young people want to aspire to is not what's being offered. There is no careers advice. The jobs that are being offered are low paid, low skilled jobs. But you know, like social media, like young people are finding ways to support themselves. Like when the government is dropping out, like the amount of groups on Facebook and stuff like that, where young people will come together and like form like an activist group. You know, will come together to challenge racism, or they'll come together around the environment. Like that is already happening.
Yeah.
So
I think that sense of community as well, probably with COVID, I feel like that's been, as you said, there's lots of those kind of neighbourhood groups and Facebook groups bringing people together over a cause. Ndu?
Yeah, I think if everything's kind of been said, but it really depends on who you're talking to, like where are the young people from? Because every location in this country, forget about city, but even towns and boroughs will give you different answers. You know, for some it's crime, for some it's access to education, for some it's even worse. You know, poverty exists in this country. I think that the thing that underpins kind of the biggest social issues, if you were, is just the sense of transparency. I think that's probably what underpins everything that you can kind of think of. You know, like why is there a pay gap? You know, why is there this? Why is there that? I think that air of transparency in history is really important now, because it is so easy to find out the real reasons to things. And so when I hear people talking about, but you know, that was in the past, that's the point. You know, the past is what's informed and what informs the present, and we need to be way more aware of that past. And unfortunately, you know, the education system in my opinion, I'm a real big advocate of making it better in this country, because I think it fails pretty much everyone who goes through it in some way or the other. And I think that's a real issue for some of the people that you know we've spoken to, because that if you fix that, you fix a lot of the other problems, or you at least paper over some of the cracks of a lot of the other problems. So for me, that's the biggest one.
So interesting as well that where a lot of these failings are happening, and that we're seeing them across, you know, multiple areas, obviously, as we're talking it through, but also what that means in terms of opportunity, and those opportunities being really, really obvious at a time like this, where there is introspection, there is, you know, even as we're saying about communities coming together on social media. Certainly a lot of the things that are happening during lockdown, during COVID, have not been possible at other times. You know, there wasn't, you know, in when the environmental movement started in the 70s, there weren't social media groups that could give access to kind of creating movement, etc. And I think that idea of movement starting through social media, or through kind of interaction and communities being set up, is really encouraging, because if that is something that can then allow for those opportunities to change, make things change, bring change about, that leaves us with something that is something that we can build on going forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks guys. We've got a couple of questions that have come in. One from Louise: do you think a luxury brand can be credible when it talks about purpose? This is a really good question. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. I think I mean, it's tough for brands anyway to establish themselves and to kind of engage authentically. And luxury brands, I think, have the additional challenge. I don't know whether one of the panelists has some thoughts they want to share first.
I'll take that.
Okay, great.
So like I mentioned earlier, so 3 years I spent at L'Oreal, and obviously they have a massive portfolio of brands. I used to actually work in their luxury division, and you know, I wasn't even aware, but you know, L'Oreal owned the Body Shop, for example. And so, you know, when you look on social media and you look at the Body Shop's social media and you look at any post, you'll find underneath it stuff like, you sold yourself to the devil, L'Oreal do animal testing, X, Y, and Z. So for a luxury brand to be credible with purpose, you have to choose the right purpose. Like, what is it? Do you actually genuinely care? And choose something that you generally care about. And if you have a history with that purpose, speak about the history. If you don't have a history with that purpose, speak about the lack of history. In all these responses from brands around the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, unfortunately, L'Oreal did probably the worst job out of any brand that I saw, because they tried to literally ignore what they did 3 years ago with Monroe Bergdorf, and say, you know, speaking out is worth it, when actually 3 years ago they did the complete opposite. And it's really easy for anyone to remember it wasn't a lifetime ago, and B, just bring it out because it still exists on social media. What would have been a better way is to just address their misgivings from a few years ago and just said, look, we hold our hands up, we got it wrong, maybe even apologize. I'm sure people would have preferred that way more. But going back to the sense of purpose, it's making sure that it's something which you actually stand for and stand against, or want to speak to, and have a history of doing so. And if you don't, then yeah, absolutely be as open and honest as you can be.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. Thanks for sharing that. I think you're spot on. I think it is exactly about finding the right purpose. I think it's very hard to retrofit and to kind of just jump on the bandwagon with whatever the latest big issue is that everyone's talking about, and then retrofit it to your business. And particularly with luxury brands, I think there's that extra scrutiny as well. Paul, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, you know, like if you're going to do something, do it right. And like, if you've made mistakes in the past, like you say sorry. There's nothing wrong with saying sorry. Right? We've made mistakes in the past, and if you're going to do something based on a mistake, make sure that you try to put it right in the future by doing it the right way. And like what's been said earlier about being transparent, by being honest, by being authentic, and people will come along and people will join in on that journey. I just think
it's a relationship, isn't it, between brand and audience. That's something that's built on trust, as with all relationships, and I think that that's the thing that is so easy to comprehend and also seemingly so easy to miss so often, where actually it's not. We are, you know, as these communities are kind of evolving and conversations are happening, they're happening beyond an advertising. As you said at the beginning, Paul, it's not about a strap line, just encompassing something and then walking away. A lot of it is to do with what you do with that and what stands behind it and what you back it up with at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. And if you're going to do something where there's an inequality, they need to have, like, brands need to have a look inward first and have a look and make sure they're addressing it at home before they start talking about it outwardly to customers and to, you know, other people.
Christina, any thoughts in terms of specifically on the kind of luxury brands side of things?
Yeah,
you talked about cancel culture earlier and things.
Yeah, I think that with sort of like what everyone said already, but young people sort of will save up and will invest in a brand if they see that, if they think that they're on their side, if that makes sense. I've got certain friends that are devoted to certain brands because they feel like it's something that they resonate with. It speaks to them. And so again, if you're transparent and if you are, you know, honest and you actually care and listen to your audience, then, you know, I mean, that's money. I don't understand why you wouldn't do that. So,
you know, to add to that point as well, most organizations, small and large, have CSR budgets that they spend, and a lot of the time they're just forgotten about until year end when they're like, oh crap, we've got to spend it. So it's quite, I don't know, I just find it kind of a bit poor to like allocate a budget to something which is about corporate social responsibility, and then maybe send your workforce to clean a park. Not saying that there's a problem in cleaning a park, but that's just a very reactive, we need to do something thing to do. So, you know, I really think that there's a lot of easy ways to, you know, speak to the workforce and ask what they care about, what their purpose is in the workforce, and I don't know, champion a few voices socially, outwardly as well, and say, you know, this is what we are focusing we're pledging to spend our CSR money on this year, because this person, that person, and this person from our workforce across the pyramid have the same ideas, and that's why we're championing it. And therefore it's probably not even coming from your brand, it's coming from the people within your brand. So if you get it wrong, people might give you a bit of leeway. So that's what I would say.
It's very interesting as well, that transition from CSR policies and that idea of it being kind of in the background insurance policy that means that you are a good brand, but you might not have taken it outside of that, you know, cleaning up a park piece, all the way through to your marketing budget that you're now going to take and build on, because there are opportunities now more so than ever to talk to wide communities about purpose, and purpose being something that certainly I know, and for Daniela as well, you know, in setting up purpose agencies, you know, we've got a lot of, you know, what is that? What does that even mean? And that's why we're looking at kind of these different panel opportunities and speaking to audiences about how we do turn that intention into action, where it's not just, oh yeah, we want to do something in that space, that's a really nice idea, we'll come back to it after we've done all our other things, and actually put it central, bake it into the DNA, look at how it can be an integral part of your business, because it's communicating your values, it's communicating your, say, used to say your why, but it's saying, you know, what purpose do you know, what do you stand for out there? And that's really an engaging part of speaking to movement creation and audiences going forward. I think I don't see that we can park it again, and I think it needs to grow and flourish in a space that has, well, you know, is well funded, and that might be more from your marketing spend or from your PR spend than it is from other areas that might sit more in a sort of internal comms piece, and look at what that means. But it's investment, and I think it's investment with opportunity at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's all we've got time for in terms of the questions. So Chloe, I don't know if you want to wrap up and thank everyone and talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we've got a few other questions that are coming through. So what we might do is we'll put those still to the panelists and make sure that everyone gets the kind of the answers that they need and want. And it's been fantastic to have all of you here today. And thank you so much for your time and your insight, and to the audience, obviously, who've joined us this afternoon on this sunny Monday. And just to let you know as well that we will be here again next week for the second session in the summer series on purpose, which will again have some focus on building back better, because I think we're kind of gaining some real insight on people's vision of change through this. And next week's will be on how do we prioritize the environment in a post-COVID world, where we will be joined by Penny Fox, who is the Director of Media, PR and Artists at WWF UK, Ali Russell, the Chief Marketing Officer for Extreme E, and Sam Shutaria, the Head of Strategy for the Waterbear Network. So we hope to see you there. Thank you so much for joining.
And I think Kiwi's just going to log back in. He's got something to finish up, I think, as well.
For the PRCAs.
Yeah, on behalf of the PRCA.
Yep.
Hi guys, just want to say thank you for attending today's event. It was great, and thank you for all the speakers and to Chloe and Daniela. Yeah, some discount on our training, and we've just started our apprentice scheme, so links are down below. Feel free to email if you want any more information on it. And thanks again for attending, guys, and thanks for everyone else as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Cheers,
everyone.
guys. Bye-bye.
Guys,
Thanks.
thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.